Today on the podcast, we're speaking with JP Gritton, whose awards include a Cynthia Woods Mitchell Fellowship, a Disquiet Fellowship, and the Imprint Donald I'm going to butcher that.
It's
Bartholomew. Thank you. See, I can edit that in fiction. His stories have appeared or are forthcoming in Black Warrior Review, Greensboro Review, New Ohio Review, Southwest Review, Tin House, and elsewhere. His translations of the work of Brazilian writer, you're going to have to help me with this one.
Cidinha da Silva.
Thank you. Have appeared in translation. He is an assistant professor of the practice in the Department of English at Duke University, and we are so excited to speak with him today about his debut novel, Wyoming. Welcome to the show, JP.
Thank you. It's great to be on.
Thank you. Well, we talked a lot before we started taping, and I love this book, and I am so excited to share it with my mom's listeners because I feel like this is a slight departure from some of the books that we talk about, but it gets my stamp of approval, and I feel like that's what people are looking for, so whatever that's worth. So if you could just give our listeners a little snippet and tell them in a nutshell what Wyoming is about.
Well, Wyoming is about a guy whose best friend, his daughter, is sick with cancer. He works as a construction worker, but loses his job because he's sort of one of those guys that just continuously, he manages to always to kind of make the wrong decision. So he, in order to get some fast cash, he agrees to drive 50 pounds. I grew up in Colorado, I guess I should preface this. He agrees to drive 50 pounds of his brother's high grade down to Texas in order to get his hands on some fast cash. And getting down there goes fine, but coming back and sort of squaring exactly what it is he feels for this best friend of his, and it becomes sort of the journey back, I'll say, becomes a little more complicated.
It definitely does. Without spoiling anything, because as we talked about, we don't do spoilers on the show. It definitely does get more complicated, and I would agree with you tremendously. And so it's funny you say you grew up in Colorado, but like, what else is the inspiration for this book? I'm just very curious where that came from.
Yeah, well, I think people are often kind of, when they meet me, they're a little puzzled by the voice. You know, like it doesn't sound anything like who I am. So I was, my dad's family, my dad's from a little town called Errol, Missouri, which is, you know, you could ride your bike to Arkansas. It's right southern Missouri, kind of in the heart of the Ozarks, and it's, you know, so Shelley's voice, I was really close to his brother before he passed, and Shelley's voice owes a lot to my Uncle Ed. I mean, my Uncle Ed and Shelley have nothing in common, although, full disclosure, Uncle Ed and Shelley's brother Clay, they do have a bit in common, but the voice really just kind of, I told it from his perspective. I had a teacher in my grad school where he said, you know, we don't necessarily write stories in our voices. We write them in the voices we're accustomed to hearing stories in. It was Matt Clam who wrote Sam the Cat, which, you know, has a kind of like brassy New York feel to it that is not like Matt Klein, it's not Matt Klein's voice. It's just, and I think hearing that kind of, it felt like I had permission to, write from the point of view of, or rather write in the voice of somebody I wasn't. And then I guess in terms of just sort of the germ of the story, I, right out of college, I ended up, as my friends were moving to Madrid on cool Fulbrights and working in publishing and all this stuff I was envious of, I ended up working construction because it panned out that way.
We like a good story if you want to elaborate.
What's that?
We like a good story if you wanted to elaborate.
Yeah,
but no,
it's nothing interesting. I mean, it was basically, I was sort of in this relationship that I kind of knew wasn't going anywhere. But it's literally, the most boring part of the book is where the story came from. Basically, I fell into... Is
it really? That's so funny.
I fell into this kind of dead-end job because I knew I didn't want to move to... On some level, I think I knew I didn't want to join my girlfriend in Seattle. And then, so I just ended up working on a construction company in Colorado. And at the end of every shift, they would put all the tools, because the tools would go missing all the time because they're, construction equipment is ridiculously expensive.
Yeah.
And they would, at the end of the night, they would hide it, or at the end of the day, they would hide it or lock it up in a tool chest. And there was just something about that process that it just really interested me. And then, suddenly I was writing this story about a guy who walks off with an air compressor, and that kind of became the first chapter.
Wow. That's really cool. Well, it's funny that you say the most boring part of the story is how it got started, because I don't know, I think, and our listeners too, but I love those kind of really obscure little factoids or details or things that you might not think are interesting. Before we started taping, we were talking about how, what it sounds like when you're talking versus when you're writing, but I could just listen to you talking about working in construction. I think that's fascinating. Do you have any stories from that were, particular interest or lost toes or things like that?
Well, I ended up getting to be pretty good buddies with the foreman of the crew, who was just a really cool guy. That he was from Ohio, but part of Ohio that he reminded me actually a lot of my uncle. He's from that kind of part of Ohio that's right by Kentucky. And he would just, smoke tons of weed and get up and do these feats of, amazing feats of strength and put up the entire frame of a house in the space of a couple afternoons. And I remember every lunch he had a 2-liter Mountain Dew and a few hand-rolled cigarettes, and that was all he ate, or drank, I guess. And so, there are no stories that come to mind. I mean, it was a great job. I mean, in a lot of ways, it was, after the job I'm working right now, it's, we were talking about before you started recording, I teach in English department at a college now. You know, it was the best job I ever had. And I think for whatever reason, you know, I didn't even work it that long, but it was this experience that just stuck with me. And I don't know why. I mean, I remember my last day, Tim and I decided to go out to lunch, and, you know, we just sat and drank beer after beer after beer, and just sat in a bar, and went back to work, and, you know, like, kind of did some work for a little while, and then sobered up and drove home. And I mean, it was just you know, something about working outside and getting to know I don't know, getting to know what it feels like to be you know, the guy that repairs your floor, you know, or like the I don't know, it changed kind of how I looked at my life. And in some ways, I guess it's sort of responsible for the book.
Yeah, no, I think that's really cool. I could really just listen to you. Like, you know, I know you're like, oh, there's, you know, no stories or whatever, but like, even just the way you describe like the 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew and the cigarettes, like, I think like I mean, not to like reduce it, but you're a very strong storyteller. And I think so. It's very like magnetic, the way that you speak and tell stories. So interesting.
Do go on.
Oh yeah, I know, right? Compliment. But well, no, I like, as soon as your team sent this book, I was like, as soon as I saw it, I knew that it was my kind of book, and then I read it.
Yeah, they did a great job on the cover.
Isn't it great? I like. Yeah. When we post the interview, we'll post the cover too. You know, but I just like. Yeah, I feel like it says it. I feel like it is a very strong cover. And did you have any input, or what was that process like? Because it's quite good.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. Like the kind of the guy Jacob Valla at Tin House is who made the cover, and I, you know, it always featured a guy in a truck, and initially it looked like the cover of like a Bruce Springsteen album. It was kind of this grainy photograph with the cowboy in a truck, and it was huge block print, like WYOMING. The letter's so big that it didn't fit on, you know, on a single line. And I love that one, and I really wanted to go with it. Like, you know, Jacob did. Yeah, I mean, he did a fabulous job on all of it, but that one really just grabbed me. And then somebody pointed out that it looked like OMG, like it looked like the title of the book was OMG, which was not what we wanted for a somber tale of construction work and betrayal. But I really liked the font, and he had sent in I think he started to kind of play with this idea that, like, you know, fire is a really big part of the book. You know?
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. I mean, I don't always have the vocabulary to describe beautiful things. I see them more, but it, you know, because like part of it looks like a photograph, and part of it looks like a painting over it. Like it's. I feel like the more you stare at this book, it's kind of not like an optical illusion, but like a little bit. And it's just got a lot of layers, but it's like simple. It's not overly complicated, but there's like a lot of like symbolic stuff. And I feel like they nailed it. And our listeners love to like have that insight into what your process is like, because I think so often it's like, oh, you're an author, you write this book, and then it comes out, and it is what, you know, what your readers, what they eventually see, but so much of it goes into the process. And yeah, I think it's just cool to kind of like hear that, because we've had stories of like book covers that are like, you know, just so awful, or like, oh, they nailed it, or it's, you know, I remember, I think it was the cover for one, oh man, oh, it's going to bother me now. I can't remember. I was at it's actually really going to bother me. I feel like it wasn't a Jeffrey Eugenides book, but it was one of them where, it was Purity. Jonathan Franzen, that's what it was. Not
Purity? Is that the one it just said, it's literally just cursive on a white cover? Yeah.
And
not a great.
I was at an event where they were talking about like all of the incantations that got them to that cover, and you would never really have. Maybe I shouldn't say you would have really guessed, but you would have been hard pressed to find out that it had gone through like 13 or so, like almost a dozen phases to get to that. So it's just interesting, and I think also people want to know like what if any involvement the authors have in that. But it's interesting when you were talking about some of the storytelling too. Is one of the things that I really like stuck out to me a lot in this book was like how you described landscape. And there's just like a very brief little line that I wanted to read that, like, I don't know, it's just more for texture, but you just said, past Dallas, come a whole bunch of places you never heard of. And I don't know why, like, that was the line that kind of stuck with me, but can you just talk a little bit about, like, because this is really like a story that's on the move, but you cover so much ground, and like, how did you kind of embody? I felt like landscape was a real character in and of itself in this book.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something about kind of the plain states that is. My dad, as I said, my dad grew up in the Ozarks, and we grew up in Colorado. But he was really close to his family. I mean, and we're all still close to his side of the family. But every year, and a couple times a year, we would get in the car and drive the 14 hours down to southern Missouri. And I remember, obviously there's part of it you sort of hate, because the landscape is, I think it's really beautiful, in a lot of ways, just kind of the openness of it, and how like contourless it is, literally. I mean, it's eastern Colorado. That's pretty much where Kansas begins, and there's not much to look at until you get to around Kansas City. So there was something about, stopping in those kind of little highway towns, Hayes, Kansas, or Goodland, or Lyman, Colorado, where, it's kind of fast. You wonder, you fill up for gas, and you wonder, what do you do outside of this job? I mean, what are your, what's it like to grow up in a town like this? And it always kind of fascinated me. And I think that in some ways that kind of made its way into the book, just not, there are beautiful parts of Colorado, and there are beautiful parts of Texas and Oklahoma and Missouri, but Shelley does not go to those places. And so, what is, I don't know. I guess it just, in a way, it kind of became, like another character in the book.
Yeah. Well, I think
what he was passing through.
Yeah. Well, and I think we also tend to have this very romanticized ideal of a road trip, and, you know, and that, right, you are going to see all of the exciting, you know, the highlights and all of that. But it's kind of interesting when you get to places where you're like, kind of like, where am I? My mom and I did a road trip, like a petite road trip, I would say. This was about 10 years ago. I just graduated high school, and we drove from Albuquerque to Denver. And yeah, and like going, you know, coming from the East Coast, where, you know, if you spend that much amount of time, like you've gone through like half of the, you know, East Coast, and just like, I'll never forget, I fell asleep in the car at some point between, we had stopped in Santa Fe, Taos, and a few other spots, but the ride from Taos, and I woke up and we were in Colorado and like stopped and like found a diner, which was really great. And I definitely tried to steal a mug from this diner because like you couldn't procure them, but I really wanted it. Now I'm mad that I don't have it. But then I was like, if I steal from this diner, like I don't know where I am. Like I was very aware of like we're not from here, and like what if they come out looking for me? And then I'm like, you know. But anyway, that's neither here nor there story. But yeah, it was just like kind of seeing all of the like nooks and crannies almost, and kind of we knew why we were at the diner, but like because we were passing through. But like I definitely had that feeling of looking around, going like who are like. This is a Thursday morning. Like, what are you doing here? Yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of those thoughts, but I feel like when you're in a car and you have like space and distance, I tend to think about a lot of things that sometimes sound weird when I repeat them out loud.
No. Yeah, I mean this part of Missouri that I mentioned. You know, I mean the jobs like. The big industry there was the Angelica uniform factory, and then in the mid '90s or something, it closed down, and so and that finds its way. I mean, I changed the name of the factory, but that obviously finds its way into the book, and I think like people ask, why did you set it at the end of the 80s, and the honest answer is like I have no idea, but I do think that there's something about the death of industry and what that does to a town like Errol or it's Crockett in the book. What that does to a town like that is pretty devastating, and that for whatever reason found its way into this book.
Yeah, well, I mean, it definitely. I feel like it found its way for a reason. But so it's interesting. So this is your debut novel.
Yeah.
And you have got right. I mean, I say that, and I realize it sounded like a question, but I'm like, no, that's fact. And you have got, and this, I feel like the reception, at least like, and I'm curious what your feeling on the reception is, but you've got this like amazing quote from Alice McDermott. I'm just gonna like read some praise for a moment, just so that everyone can know like what exactly we're dealing with. But she says, Wyoming marks the debut of a gifted storyteller, an authentic, pitch-perfect portrait of an America too often caricatured or ignored. And then you have starred reviews from Kirkus and PW, which is amazing. And Kirkus calls Wyoming an affecting, richly drawn, darkly humorous, which I definitely agree with, novel about grifting siblings, one worse than the other. And Publishers Weekly calls and Wyoming, this auspicious debut marks I can't even read my own handwriting. I'll edit this. Marks Gritton as a storyteller to watch. There we go. I thought I had neat handwriting, but like that's amazing, right? And so I'm curious how you found the reception of this book and like what you're hearing or kind of how you're feeling. Yeah, now that this book is out there.
No, it's pretty wild. I mean, it's and just I feel like the early reviews were just so kind and generous, and I wrote a tip sheet for the Publishers Weekly people, and they're a blast to work with, and I think they've been awfully generous. I mean, so I was working on a novel that I feel like is sort of getting toward finished when I guess sort of redrafted Wyoming, which would have been, I don't know, fall of 2015. So like, I kind of think of Wyoming as my second novel, and the first one just didn't get published because it wasn't very good. So like, I like, I'm not trying to say that the praise doesn't mean it means the world. I mean, it's fabulous to have somebody like Justin St. Germain or Alice McDermott or Robert Boswell saying kind things about your book. But the truth is I wrote a story that's actually about the Coopers, but it's set in Missouri about 10 years after Wyoming. And that was really the first book I ever tried to write. I hope people still think of me as a storyteller to watch, but the truth is that I've written some pretty crappy stories.
No, it's funny to hear you talk about your writing like that, because you're also a professor. So what is that like? I have so many like thoughts, but you're an English professor, so like also obvious question, but like, have your students read this book, and is it on the curriculum for next semester?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, to say, well, I teach creative writing, so I kind of feel like it's my wheelhouse. It's something I've been, doing my whole adult life. And, so I couldn't give a lecture on Dante's Inferno. That would be sort of above my...
Who wants one? I mean, come on.
Right.
Anyway.
Well,
Certain people.
Certain people, yeah. I mean, and I think that what's so great about being housed in a department like Duke is that students are hyper aware of the tradition and in really positive ways. Like they, if, for example, one of them hopefully one day picks up my book, I'm not going to require it for my courses, although that was a great idea. Like they'll notice that it's really, sort of, that it owes a lot to the noir genre and to narrative journeys, like, or excuse me, journey narrative. It's my dyslexia kicking in. But it's, as far as, teaching English, what my courses tend to look like is we'll get together, somebody will submit a story, we get together once a week and we get to kick the story around for, in flattering ways, but we get to talk about the story for, 2.5 hours. It's kind of the best job. It's just a blast. I mean, it's, for a book nerd, it kind of feels like I won the lottery a little bit.
That's so cool. Well, and so as a book nerd, because I have 2 more questions for you.
Yeah.
what are you reading now? Or like, what have you read that you've really enjoyed lately? Anything you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I just read Indian Killer by Sherman Alexie, which I feel, I don't know that I had ever heard of that book until a friend of mine, Sean McCoy, recommended it. And it sort of, it snuck by, I think, because people tend to think of Sherman Alexie as more like a humorist, but it's this really dark kind of potboiler about basically what happens is white men start showing up scalped in and around Seattle, and it's sort of about the mystery unraveling, but it's also about this radio personality who's Alex Jones-esque, kind of whipping people into a racist fervor. It's a great book. It was just unbelievably well paced. So that's the last book I've finished. I've been kind of making my way through. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Killing Commendator, Haruki Murakami's new one, and it's I'm liking it a lot. He's one I definitely admire. And then I've been kind of pecking away at Alias Grace for a while.
Yeah, there's so many books to read, right? But,
I know.
Right? But luckily for the two of us, we've already read Wyoming, which
Thank you.
That our listeners, will put on their list. No, I mean, that's the thing is that there really are so many books, and I think, that like, I was just looking up the Sherman Alexie, like this came out a handful of years ago, and it's like, it's so easy to like, I think when you're steeped in books, is that if you missed something, we're kind of like always on to the next thing. And the way that like I tend to have to read is like, 6 months to a year out. So if something's out now and I don't get to it,
it's just totally
add it to a list. And it's a little depressing. But that's for another show. So, so my last question is, I read an interview that you gave with LitHub, and it was like all of the questions, no wrong answers. And it was great. And I forget what the question was exactly, but I know that it elicited the response of like, if my book got sold to like Netflix, you said that you might you might get a monogram bathrobe, and so which made me giggle. But then I was thinking, like, what would that monogram bathrobe look like? Like, have you thought about it? Like, is it plush? Is it flannel? Like, what is the monogram block? Like, I had questions. So
well, I mean, definitely plush. I mean, that goes without saying. But I mean, I feel like writing this weird gig where like randomly the right person reads your novel and decides, oh geez, we're going to make this show about it. I mean, the funny thing about all the bad TV out there now that like we're in this digital TV era is like, there are good books everywhere. There are good stories coming out all the time, and some of them, some of them are getting turned into Handmaid's Tale. If you have the profile of somebody like Margaret Atwood, I mean, they might make a show out of your book. I
wonder if she has that.
But she probably does, and it's probably plus too. But it just seems totally random, and I don't know. Maybe I don't know if I'll do the bathrobe for sure, but I will at least replace the bumper of my 2004 RAV4, which was destroyed by one of my neighbors years ago.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast for today and for talking about Wyoming. If people want to find you, how might they go about that?
I think the best way would just be on my website, jpgritton.com.
Fantastic. Well, everyone, go pick up a copy of Wyoming, which is out today, and enjoy it. And thank you so much for chatting with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.